Unfortunately, we only have 2 of our 3 participants. Dr. Busch had a family emergency yesterday afternoon, so our thoughts and prayers with his family. However, we do have his paper, and after I go through our brief introductions, I will read sections of that to give you an idea of his talk as well. As one reminder as well, please silence your cell phones for the beginning of the presentation. To start off, Dr. Busch, his paper title is The Domestic Policy Agenda. He's a professor of government at Claremont McKenna College in California and the Associate Dean of the Faculty. He is the author of 8 books, his most recent being Reagan's Victory, The Presidential Election of 1980, and The Rise of the Right. In 2007, Dr. Busch received a Fulbright Teaching Fellowship for Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine. Prior to his career at Claremont McKenna, Dr. Busch held teaching positions at the University of Denver and the University of Virginia. While at the University of Denver, he received the Teacher Scholar of the Year Award in 2002. Dr. Busch received his BA from the University of Colorado and a Master's and Ph.D. in Government from the University of Virginia. Brian Flanagan will speak on the state of national security state, Harry Truman, George W. Bush, and America's ramparts in the 21st century. Mr. Flanagan is the Associate Director here at the Hauenstein Center. In 2008, he received the Mobby Fellowship to explore the connection between philanthropy and the American presidency. Mr. Flanagan was also appointed to the Michigan Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Committee, a 2-year effort charged with providing leadership and direction for Michigan's celebration of the 200th anniversary of Lincoln's birthday this February. In addition to Gleaves' efforts, Brian actually also helped found the Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy, where we bring in students here at Grand Valley to learn principles of leadership throughout history. Mr. Flanagan is a graduate of the University of Notre Dame in 2003 with a degree in English, and is currently a master's candidate at Grand Valley State School of Public and Nonprofit Administration. Finally, we have Dr. Charles Wolcott, and he will be speaking on the Bush staff and cabinet system. Dr. Wolcott is a professor of political science in the Political Science Department at Virginia Tech University, where he's been teaching over 20 years. He's written or edited 5 books, his most recently being Empowering the White House, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, co-authored with Karen M. Holt. Since 2001, Professor Wolcott has been the editor-in-charge of Congress and the Presidency, an interdisciplinary journal of research and political science. Dr. Wolcott has also won several teaching awards, including a Certificate of Teaching Excellence from the Virginia Tech College of Arts and Sciences in 2003. Before coming to Virginia Tech, Dr. Wolcott had a distinguished career at the University of Minnesota, where he taught for 20 years. He's a graduate of Occidental College and received his master's and Ph.D. from the University of California at Santa Barbara. To begin, I'm going to read some excerpts from Dr. Busch's paper, and then we'll continue on with our panel. George W. Bush's domestic policy agenda. From the moment he announced his bid for the presidency in 1999, George W. Bush sought to recast American electoral politics by recasting the Republican Party's domestic policy approach. While Bush's foreign policy agenda had received more attention, the character and implications of his domestic policy agenda are arguably more difficult to disentangle. In some areas of domestic policy, Bush enjoyed surprising successes, and others embarrassing failures. And observers have been quick to disagree not only about whether Bush's initiatives were good or bad, but even how to characterize them in the first place. For some, Bush was at least as conservative as Reagan, an ideological president who sought to turn away narrow electoral victories into a broad shift to the right in public policy. George W. Bush's administration, offered one such critic, offered a good example of adroitly managed plutocracy. For others, his domestic policy represented a lamentable betrayal of Reagan, a shift away from limited government conservatism that bloated the federal government and sundered the Republican coalition. Yet others argued that Bush's efforts were a bold and commendable attempt to turn big government to conservative ends for the first time. The Bush domestic agenda on the scales. George W. Bush set out to change the political landscape through a domestic policy agenda that would mollify the conservative base of the Republican Party while softening the edges of the party's image acquired in the rough and tumble 1990s. His domestic successes ebbed and flowed with standing and leverage. In the end, however, compassionate conservatism and its outgrowths, like the ownership society, clearly fell short of Bush's hopes. Bush was not without significant domestic policy accomplishments, most notably the tax cuts, education reform, and appointments that shifted the Supreme Court's center of gravity to the right. One might add an incremental but significant redirection of the nation's energy policy. Nevertheless, the overall political policy structure of the compassionate conservatism did not hold together. Key components like Social Security reform and immigration reform simply died on the vine. Hurricane Katrina unraveled much of Bush's outreach to black Americans. After a promising start in 2001, faith-based initiatives hit the wall in Congress and were relegated to a program subsisting on easily reversible executive orders. Bush's record on compassionate conservatism was ambiguous enough that commentators debated whether he'd even acted on it. Slate editor Jacob Weisberg argued in the pages of the New York Times that Bush, as a compassionate conservative, remains an appealing figure, but a largely fictional one, whose preoccupation with war and tendency toward polarization came to dominate his presidency. For his part, former Bush speechwriter Michael Gerson countered that by any fair historical measure, Bush's achievements on social justice at least equal those of President Bill Clinton, although Bush has received little attention or thanks for his compassionate reforms. In the end, Gerson concluded compassionate conservatism was a cause without a constituency, except for Bush himself. Traditional conservatives disliked Bush's departure, while liberals gave Bush no credit for political reasons.